Waco, 1953. Lubbock, 1970. Jarrell, 1997. Three of the most violent, devastating tornadoes to ever hit the state of Texas. In this first episode of Storm Stories, we go back in time to May 11th, 1953, 4:10 p.m. in the evening, Waco, Texas. An extremely powerful and violent tornado with wind speeds exceeding 260 miles per hour has touched down near Lorena, south of Waco. The tornado churned northward, growing wider and more intense as it moved toward downtown Waco. By the time it reached the city, the tornado was a half-mile wide, with winds so fierce they destroyed nearly every structure in its path. Within minutes, the tornado struck the heart of Waco's business district, where it obliterated entire blocks of buildings, shattered storefronts, and collapsed walls. The storm hit Waco's bustling downtown area at a time whenever stores were still open and the streets were crowded with shoppers and workers. The tornado's sudden arrival caught many people off guard, with little time to seek shelter. The storm demolished many of Waco's historic buildings, including the R.T. Dennis furniture store, where the building collapsed under its weight, trapping and killing more than 30 people inside. Many of these older buildings were constructed before modern engineering standards, and they crumbled quickly under the tornado's intense force. Rescue workers and volunteers arrived to find a scene of utter devastation. Buildings were reduced to rubble, cars were crushed, and debris were strewn across the streets. Rescue efforts were hampered by the unstable debris and the threat of additional storms, as more severe weather was predicted later in the evening. In some areas, gas lines ruptured, causing fires amid the wreckage. In total, 114 people lost their lives in Waco due to the tornado, with hundreds more injured. Many of the victims were found in basements or lower floors of collapsed buildings, where they had taken shelter in a desperate attempt to survive. Hospitals were overwhelmed by the sheer number of injuries, and makeshift triages were set up around the city. Now let's dive into some of the survivor stories. Pauline Adams was shopping in the downtown area of Waco with her sister when the tornado struck. They had just entered the R.T. Dennis furniture store when the sky darkened and the powerful winds began shaking the building. Pauline remembered hearing a loud roar like 1,000 trains. She described the terrifying sensation of being buried alive under tons of debris after the building collapsed. She and her sister were trapped, unable to see anything in the pitch darkness, but they could hear the faint cries of others nearby. Hours went by before rescuers dug through the rubble and found them alive. Pauline recalls being pulled out with only minor injuries, feeling lucky to have survived. Joe and Betty Brown were newlyweds living in Waco when the tornado struck. They had taken shelter in their basement, feeling the floor above them shake violently. Joe described holding on to Betty as the storm seemed to tear their home apart from the inside out. After the tornado passed, they emerged from their shelter to find their neighborhood unrecognizable, and many homes in their community were completely destroyed. The Browns were unhurt, but many of their friends were injured or killed. Joe would later say that he never seen anything like it and never wanted to see it again. Another survivor, James Donahue, a 16-year-old high school student, was downtown near the Plaza Theater when the tornado hit. He remembered looking up and seeing the sky turn an eerie green color just moments before the funnel cloud formed. The sound of the tornado haunted him for years, a loud, horrifying roar that grew louder as it neared. When the tornado passed, Donahue emerged from a nearby store where he took shelter to find that the Plaza Theater and most of the surrounding buildings were leveled. His account included vivid details of the stunning silence over the area after the storm, broken only by the cries for help from those trapped in the rubble. Another survivor, Elizabeth McCormick, a nurse at Hillcrest Baptist Medical Center at the time of the tornado, described the chaos at the hospital as it became overwhelmed with injured residents. She worked for hours, caring for people with all manner of injuries, from broken bones to severe head trauma. She recalled the bravery of her colleagues who worked tirelessly despite their exhaustion and shock. One image that stuck with her was that of a fellow nurse holding the hand of a young child who lost both parents in the tornado. Another survivor was Ray Sanders, a firefighter in Waco and one of the first responders to the scene after the tornado passed through. He described the scene downtown as a war zone, with buildings collapsed into piles of bricks, cars overturned, with people injured and dazed in the streets. Sanders and his crew worked through the night, digging through the debris with their bare hands to pull out survivors. Ray spoke of the camaraderie and resilience that developed among the rescuers, who often faced dangerous conditions to save lives. He admitted that the sights he saw that day never left him, and he was deeply affected by the loss of life and devastation he saw that day. In the aftermath of the Waco tornado, survivors, responders, and the entire Waco community faced a long road to recovery, with stories of bravery, tragedy, and resilience passed down for generations. This concludes our coverage of the Waco tornado. If you like weather-related content, please like and subscribe. In this episode of Storm Stories, we travel back in time to May 11th, 1970, Lubbock, Texas, to witness one of the most powerful and destructive tornadoes in Texas and U.S. history. The skies during the afternoon were clear and dry on May 11th, 1970, giving a false sense of calm that would be shattered later that night by a powerful F5 multi-vortex tornado. One of the ingredients that led to this disaster was a dry line that moved in from the west. When this dry air collided with the rich moisture plume from the Gulf of Mexico after 6:30 p.m., it lit the fuse on an atmospheric explosion that went off after 9 p.m. later that night. The tornado touched down southwest of Lubbock around 9:35 p.m., traveling for 8.5 miles, causing a path of destruction across 25% of the city, with the twister lifting near the Lubbock Municipal Airport. There were 26 fatalities, with numerous injuries, ranging from 500 up to 2,000 casualties, with 1,500 treated for injuries and 95 being hospitalized. Many of the injuries were caused by broken glass in the downtown area. Downtown Lubbock was heavily impacted by the tornado, with skyscrapers and buildings bearing the brunt of the violent winds. 80% of the plate glass windows were shattered in the downtown district. The tornado's outer circulation struck the Great Plains Life building, distorting the frame counterclockwise and disabling 3 of the building's 4 elevators. The twisting of the building caused severe cracks in the stairwell. Bricks were also stripped from the building and windows were blown out. There were around 30 people in the building when the tornado hit. They took shelter in the lobby. As the tornado passed near the 15-story First National Bank and Pioneer Natural Gas building, they were largely leveled. One Greyhound bus was hurled onto a downtown building by the tornado. The steel frames of 2 buildings at the Newsom Living Center were contorted by the tornado. One of the buildings was destroyed and the other was severely damaged. After the tornado reached the intersection of University Avenue and 4th Street, it looped eastward and intensified, becoming increasingly destructive. Student housing in the Overton area of Lubbock was particularly hard hit by the severe damage, requiring the demolition of the building. The University Arms Apartments on 5th Street and University Avenue received moderate damage. The Arnett Benson subdivision received significant damage. Roofs were damaged and tree limbs were torn near the Clovis Highway. After clearing the downtown area, the tornado tracked northeast along U.S. Highway 87. Significant residential damage was located just north of 4th Street. The tornado inflicted considerable damage to the homes near the Lincoln Country Club. The tornado then tracked across the Lubbock Municipal Airport, damaging hangars and buildings. Airplanes were strewn across the tarmac by the powerful winds. Roughly 100 planes were destroyed by the tornado, both inside and outside the hangars. Another small military aircraft being irreparably damaged. Now let's listen to some interviews with survivors of the tornado. Here's an interview with Ronald Hill. I was stationed in Lubbock with the DPS in September of 1968. We lived a mile east and north of A-Cup. I worked an early shift that morning and was home in the middle of the afternoon when I heard the sounds of hail hitting the ground. I looked out to see hailstones the size of softballs. I had picked up a new state car in Austin a week earlier and since I didn't want to drive a hail-damaged car for 2 or 3 years, I drove it to the co-op gym at ACUB and parked it under the suction shed. Then I noticed how dark the clouds were gathering to the southwest. About 8 p.m., I went home and put on a uniform because it looked things were about to get rough. I was on Farm Road 789, about a mile north of where we lived, and I watched the lights of eastern and northeastern Lubbock just disappear. Another patrolman, Joey Sherman, was on Farm Road 400 to my west when Lubbock DPS went off the air in mid-broadcast. Joey asked, "What happened to Lubbock?" And all I could answer was, "They must have lost power." Lubbock came back on with orders from Major Charlie Bell for all units to report to Lubbock, saying it had been hit by the tornado. My first assignment was to turn all traffic south and west of the intersection at University and 19th. A Civil Air Patrol pulled up and asked if I needed help. I said yes. Then a carload of teenage boys also asked if we needed help, and we asked them if they could direct traffic. They said yes if we could teach them. They saved our necks that night. After seeing all the destruction that night and the following days, it made me realize that everything we work hard for can be wiped out in a matter of seconds. Another survivor story was that of Linda Schaefer. I was a senior at Texas Tech University. I landed at the Lubbock Airport about 5 p.m. the afternoon of May 11th. As we were flying in, I could see the huge thundercloud with a strange yellow hue towering above the plane. As I stepped on the stairs, I was blown into the rail. The wind was blowing so hard. I found myself stranded at the airport because I could not get my ride on the phone. I ended up calling a friend who picked me up after she got off work. As we were on the highway going toward the Tech campus, it started hailing. We pulled off the road and found shelter under the country club awning. After about 30 minutes, we continued on Mesa Drive to the intersection of Highway 289 and 87 to Avenue Q, then west on 4th Street at about 4th and Avenue T. It started raining so hard it was hard to see. We followed the taillights of a car and turned off 4th onto Avenue U. We parked on the east side of a dumpster in the parking lot of an Azarco bottled water business and warehouse. The rain stopped, but the wind was blowing so hard I could not open the passenger side door. We sat in the car for about 10 minutes when I had the urgency to get out of the car. I talked my friend into getting out of the car and we started running. We ran down an alley. The garage door to a warehouse was open. We ran in and were greeted by 2 men. They led us to an office where one of the men's wife and 2 preschool children were. The wind had pretty much died down, so my friend decided to walk over to a huge plate glass window to check on her car. When she was about 8 feet from the window, all hell broke loose. There was an exploding sound combined with breaking glass. I immediately dropped to the floor with my knees and legs tucked under me and my arms and hands protecting my head. A ceiling tile fell on me not long after that explosion. I got up and ran with everyone else to take shelter in the hall, with 2 large ceiling tiles over us. It sounded like a freight train outside. When it was clear the tornado was over, we emerged from the shelter. The car windows were blown out. The dumpster we parked by was in the middle of the intersection of 4th and Avenue U. The gas station the warehouse was behind wasn't there. The outside walls of the office that created the hall we were in were destroyed, and the roof was gone. Electric lines were down, and many houses were severely damaged. My friend and I felt lucky to be alive. The Lubbock tornado advanced weather science, including the development of the Fujita scale by Dr. Ted Fujita. It is used to rate tornadoes on their power and destruction. The storm also encouraged a deeper focus on Doppler radar technology, which detects wind patterns inside storms. By detecting wind patterns inside storms, forecasters issue tornado warnings, giving residents time to prepare for tornadic storms. After Lubbock, meteorologists started doing more detailed damage surveys. This helped with a better understanding of tornado structure and intensity. This concludes our episode on the Lubbock tornado. If you like weather-related content, please like, comment, and subscribe. In today's episode of Storm Stories, we travel back in time to May 27, 1997, Carroll, Texas. 3:48 p.m. in the evening, a massive multi-vortex twister is entering the neighborhood. People are hunkering down in their homes, waiting for the storm to pass. But this storm is not your typical thunderstorm. In fact, it is not your typical tornado. It is a massive, half-mile wide beast with wind speeds close to 300 miles per hour. This monster was moving at only 3 miles an hour, and it grew in size to 3/4 of a mile wide. It struck its first home in the northeastern part of the subdivision. A clock was found in the debris with its time stopped at 3:48, marking the time the nightmare started for the Double E subdivision. This rotating buzzsaw unleashed 300-mile-per-hour winds on the neighborhood for 3 minutes, completely demolishing homes, leaving only concrete slabs remaining. Unfortunately, when the carnage was done, 27 people lost their lives, including 5 members of the Igo family, 4 members of the Moring family, and 3 members of the Smith family. Hundreds of cattle were also lost in the storm. The storm was very unusual in many ways. Its path was not your typical tornado path. It moved from northeast to southwest, opposite of the direction most tornadoes move in. Its movement was only a crawl at 3 miles per hour. This only enhanced its destruction. The upper level conditions supporting tornadoes were only at moderate levels, but the low levels were loaded with super rich moisture. What enhanced the localized severe parameters was the location of a weak cold front to the northwest of Gerald and a gravity wave moving from northeast to southwest. When these collided, it was like a bomb going off. The only safe place to be in the path of this storm was underground. However, there were survivors on the edge of the circulation. One of them was 9-year-old Christian LaFrance. She said she and her parents were looking out the doorway, and they could see it, a skinny little string. This was the monster in its infancy. Her dad told her to take the cushions off the sofa and take them to the bathroom. They all huddled there, and Kristen got into the tub, her back against the wall. Her mother sat in front of her. There wasn't enough room in the tub for her dad, so he squatted next to it. Kristen said she heard something that sounded like pots and pans banging into each other. I remember my dad saying, "Hold on tight." She said in an instant everything was gone. The wall behind her fell on her, pushing her down. Dirt filled her mouth and she couldn't breathe. She remembered trying to spit it out, and everything went black. Kristen awoke in her front yard, rain pouring down on her. It stung as it hit the gashes in her body. A large chunk of her right arm had been torn away. She had a long gash on her hip going around to her behind. A cut on her knee, a cut on her head, but no broken bone. She could lift her left arm and her head, but nothing else. She looked around and her home was gone. The bathtub that she sat in moments before was disintegrated. They never found a piece of it. She heard someone screaming. It was her mom, several feet away, her jaw broken, buried beneath a tree. Kristen was able to recognize her by her gold watch. Her dad was nowhere in sight. She learned later he died. Her aunt identified him looking at a Polaroid photo. Kristen and her mom were taken to the hospital. She spent a month in recovery. Kristen's life was never the same. She lost 2 friends who lived across the street. Another survivor was Adana Peterson. She and her family took shelter in a bathroom. When they crawled out, the bathroom walls were the only thing left standing on their property. The survivors of the Gerald tornado and the Gerald community at large rebuilt their neighborhood, but the scars remain, because nothing can bring back the people who lost their lives in this awful storm. This concludes this episode of Storm Stories about the Gerald tornado. If you like weather-related content, please like and subscribe.